I wanted to get into Ukraine because you've been doing a lot of great work covering that on almost a daily basis. And so I wanted to begin, though, here in the United States, we have midterm elections coming up. And there's been quite a few, let's just say, events transpiring politically around the Ukraine situation. Last Monday, we had the Congressional Progressive Caucus publish a letter to Joe Biden's administration saying that they were in favor of diplomacy and that they wanted some sort of conversation about a possible ceasefire. However, the caveat was they supported everything that had happened up until that point with regard to the U.S.'s involvement in the Ukraine conflict up until that point. But not even that was satisfactory to the Biden administration, and there was a pretty intense backlash, so much so that the cowardly so-called Progressive Caucus rescinded their letter, retracted it within 24 hours, and it was very embarrassing. Lots of staff being thrown under the bus. I covered this earlier in the week on this program. But now, I mean, there's more, right? There were a few disruptions, interruptions, kind of protests, you could call them, of various members of the progressive wing of the Democratic Party, if we can call them that. And I wanted to pull up this particular Ilhan Omar disruption because Ilhan Omar is considered probably the most vocal of the quote unquote progressive Democrats on issues of foreign policy. And so here's how she reacted to I'm gonna add this. Here's how she reacted to these protests, these disruptions. So I'm gonna play the video, and then I definitely want your reaction. Let me know if you all can hear this in the chat.
You are supposed to be a progressive Democrat, anti-war. Anti-war. 80 billion to Ukraine is not anti-war.
We are helping Ukraine defend themselves.
Ukraine is killing its own citizens in the Donbass.
War. We are helping little children like me that have been helped. So unless you have not been paying attention to what is happening, there are millions of Ukrainians that have been displaced. There are piles of bodies that are being found in mass graves. There are little children whose lives are being lost.
By Zelensky!
Here,
yeah, by Zelensky in the Donbass.
But unless you are someone like me that has been that child, you do not get to tell me what my votes mean and how I get to vote in supporting people who desperately need support.
So, all right. Well, I want to let's just see what she had to say because this was not the only comment she made. In response, she said, "I'm sorry, you're not anti-war protesters. You're dangerous propagandists, literally making a mockery of the anti-war movement. Never had the pleasure of responding to Russia flag, meaning Russia, ridiculous internet disinformation in person before. Thank you for the opportunity." This is even worse, though. I'm amazed at the nerve of some people that some people have to not be upset when the country literally waging war, she means Russia, but at the country defending itself and those helping them do that. I was even told by one of these people tonight, quote, "It's America that started the Russia war," end quote. Seriously, WTF. So I wanted to open with this because I think it's an appropriate way to dissect what I think Ilhan Omar is doing there. And look, a lot has been made of these protesters and their individual politics. I think what's important here is Ilhan Omar is a representative. She's an elected representative. She's in Congress. It's midterms. Midterm elections are here. And this is how she's responding. I wonder what your thoughts are about this, Brian.
Well, I just think it's interesting. She's shouting at an audience of people she's supposed to represent, and she's telling them, "You're not going to tell me what to do." I mean, but then how does this actually work? I thought the people elected you. You're supposed to represent them, and if they want you to vote a certain way on a topic, that's what you're supposed to do. You're not supposed to dictate to the people how things are and how things are going to be. What's also interesting is that she's talking about this conflict as if it started in late February. It did not start in late February. Russia did not start this war in late February. It intervened in the middle of a war that has been going on since 2014, when the United States, who most certainly did start all of this, illegally overthrew the elected government of Ukraine, installed a client regime propped up by literal Nazis, not even neo-Nazis, Nazis directly linked to World War II collaborators, Nazi Germany collaborators. And then from that point onward, they did openly anti-Russian, and we're talking about Russian-speaking Ukrainians, legislation that targeted them, started restricting their ability to use Russian, and then the actual conflict in the Donbas, which has been raging since 2014, thousands dead, thousands of civilians dead, the damming of the northern Crimean Canal, and denying the people of Crimea fresh drinking water. I mean, all of these things have been going on since 2014. Her sense of history started late February of this year. It goes to show you how disconnected she is. And we were talking about this before the show, and you said she's going to tell you how it is because she read the Washington Post, because that's all she's doing. She did no research. She is just repeating the propaganda that we have all seen in the Washington Post, in the New York Times. And this is what's making people upset. This is why they're shouting at her, and her just dismissing it and insisting, it's just going to make it even worse. It's just going to make people more and more frustrated.
Yeah, and one of the most disturbing parts of the response was how she used herself, right? She said that a child like her, and that people who were shouting at them, and look, these same protesters, part of this same group, whatever their politics are, they have been going around the country doing this. And she's responding saying that because she claims herself to be a victim of war, that somehow that gives her the authority to spread what actually is disinformation. This idea that Ukraine is just some singular victim to Russia, and that there's absolutely no other factual basis to this conflict, that she knows this because she's experienced it, right? And that's kind of a very some people call it identity politics. I call it identity reductionism, reducing everything to yourself and your own personal experience. Meanwhile, Ilhan Omar doesn't have the greatest record when it comes to U.S. foreign policy in Africa, on the African continent either. She's from Somalia. She's been booed at political events by her constituency in Minnesota, with big Somali community there. And she's been booed because she has supported sort of these like liberalization policies, a regime like soft power regime change that you talk a lot about, right? This this propaganda and this U.S. interference under the guise of democracy. So she's been booed on that basis. But I think the most disturbing part for me is that she will promote Washington Post propaganda while using herself as kind of the anchor for it. And I think that's just, to me, that's just a really low form. If you don't know what's actually going on, at least be curious. But you're a representative who's voting for tens of billions of dollars, 80 billion in total, of U.S. military aid transfers to Ukraine. Perhaps you should know a little bit more about what the United States is actually doing.
Yeah, and again, these are all the logical fallacies and all the propaganda tricks that we always. The first thing she's talking about is children. I mean, because that hits on emotional, on an emotional level. She's not talking about facts. She's not discussing any details about the conflict. It's just this very superficial, ambiguous, emotional narrative that she's throwing back. And it's kind of like a watered down version of what the Washington Post and the New York Times do. And her own personal experiences are irrelevant. We're talking about what's going on right now in Ukraine. So unless you came from Ukraine, And even if you were in Ukraine, look, there is a conflict right now where there are Ukrainians on both sides fighting. So obviously they disagree on what's actually going on there and their point of view. So how is she going to weigh in on this with her experience when she was a child, under whatever circumstances she's referring to? It doesn't make any sense. And it's a cop-out from having a real discussion about the topic, which she cannot do. No one in Washington can, because they're not actually making, it's the other way around. The people are not telling her what to do. She's not telling the people what to do. These special interests in Washington and on Wall Street are telling her what to do, and she has to do it. And now she's making excuses as to why she's doing it, or to convince herself that she's right for doing it.